Well, hello. I'm back out here in the Arizona desert, and this is the middle of summer. So I got out here before the sun is up. It's light out, but the sun's not directly on us yet because it's going to be a hot one. Last time I was in Oxford, which was completely different than this. So welcome to Hiking with Anderson here in the Arizona desert. And in fact, right now, this is the Clarity Fund's 2019 summer conference. So we're at the summer conference and going through foundational things about what is clear about God and challenges that have come up to belief in God. Last time, in episode 1 of season 2, I was talking about our need for a foundation, what a foundation means, what happens if we don't get a foundation in place, and the need for a foundation to go on to having maturity in the faith. And one of the things we started with at our Clarity Fund conference is the principle of clarity, which I've taught about in another episode, that some things must be clear, and especially basic things must be clear, and basic things are about God and man and good and evil. These are clear to reason. And so I want to talk in this episode about that first one. Some things are clear about God, and especially what stands out about God is that God is eternal, without beginning, and all of the things are with beginning. And that's an example of when someone asks, what does it mean for something to be clear? That's an example. Eternal is clear, the difference between eternal and not eternal, with beginning and without beginning. We don't ever confuse those two things, although we often ask about, so where does something come from? But we don't confuse if it had a beginning or didn't have a beginning. And so when we're asking what is eternal, we have a sense of what that means. It's clear what that means. We want to know what is eternal, and we also want to argue that it's clear that only God is eternal. And because, oh, hey, I'm actually being joined with a surprise guest. Look at that. Greg Goodrich is here.
Hey, everyone.
And Greg is also presenting at the summer conference. And it's good that you showed up at this point, Greg, because I think you could help us talk about why something must be eternal, right? So that's before getting to God is eternal. How could we know something must be eternal at all? Maybe nothing's eternal. What would you say about that?
Yeah, well, if something is eternal or false, that would mean nothing is eternal. But nothing is eternal means that something came from nothing. That's absurd. So, since contradictions, nothing is eternal and something's eternal, can't both be true and they can't both be false, it would seem that we would have to make the connection. Nothing is eternal leads to being from non-being. And so something is eternal must be true.
Yeah, so that's right. So let's think about the steps. If nothing is eternal, that's like saying all is temporal, all had a beginning.
Right.
Nothing has always existed. And if nothing has always existed, everything came into existence. Everything came into existence from nothing, from non-being. This is ridiculous, absurd, or contradiction. Any one of these words you want to use, being from non-being. Now, there are some different versions of this, right? So someone might say, I don't think anything is eternal. Everything is temporal, but there's this eternal line of things going back forever that had no beginning. So that's a little bit different than what you and I are talking about right now.
Sure.
That's like the standard materialist view, that the universe is changing and temporal, but there's always been universes going back forever. Mm-hmm. This view that you and I are talking about now says there was once only nothing, and then there was all things that exist. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem, this move of going from only nothing, there's only non-being, to something exists. And you can't get something from nothing. Have you ever had to prove that to someone? You can't get something from nothing?
A few times.
How do you do that? I mean, what do you say?
Yeah, do we have a distinction between being and non-being? Well, if we have nothing, then that would be non-being. So is there a distinction? If we say something came from nothing, then it would seem that now we're breaking down that distinction.
Yeah. Non-being
would be being.
Yeah, that's right. I think you end up
something.
treating being as if it is something.
Yeah.
It exists and gives rise to something else. So when I asked that, I was kind of asking with a smile if you've ever had to prove that, because although you're right, sometimes there are persons who want you to prove you can't get something from nothing. But in general, even a child knows you don't get something from nothing, right? If the cereal bowl is empty, then it won't have being come into it without pouring cereal into it.
Right.
It'll stay empty. From nothing, nothing comes. So that's generally understood, and that's precisely why children and all of us ask questions about where did this come from. If things come from nothing, we wouldn't ask where it come from. We'd say, oh, there's something else coming from nothing again.
Right. Yeah.
So we all recognize that. It's part of rationality. It's part of being rational that we want to know where does something come from, how did it come into existence, and it doesn't come from nothing, from non-being. So there's always been something. If something now exists, then there's always been something. I don't think I've ever met anyone who doubts something now exists. Have you?
No.
Yeah, so that's a given. Something now exists.
Yeah.
So therefore, there's always been something. And the question we want to figure out is, what is it? What has existed from eternity? And in Christianity, we especially affirm that only God has existed from eternity. And to attribute the eternal nature of God to something else is a fundamental mistake. It's the most fundamental mistake. It's a root error or sin or mistake, where you've attributed the eternal power of God to some aspect of the creation which was created, had a beginning.
Right. Conceptual idolatry.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
good. It's a conceptual idol as opposed to a physical idol. So you end up going on to all kinds of other mistakes from there. So if we're talking about foundation and we're beginning, what's our beginning point? When we get into discussing what exists, that's it. Our beginning point is something is eternal, something has existed from eternity. And we're going to go on in further episodes to argue that this is a God. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Greg, for being here.
Sure.
Surprise
Glad
guest.
to be here.